Hello and good afternoon to everyone out there. I'm Dawn Whalen. I'm the Executive Director of the Norfolk Foundation. I'm so happy to be hosting this webinar this evening. I hope everybody is in a cool space right now. It is hot here in Connecticut, but we're joined by environmental lecturer and author Sasha Adkins, who is in the Chicago area and under a severe thunderstorm threat right now. So if we lose her, we're all ready with a plan B, but we know how that goes in Norfolk. Power goes out all the time, so we're ready for it. Before I turn it over to a member of the Conservation Commission who will introduce Sasha, I just want to thank our ongoing sponsors in this climate series, the UCC Green Group, of course, the Norfolk Conservation Commission, and the Norfolk Library. We've also had the Norfolk Climate Coalition as part of this series as well. I noticed that was off the banner here. So I have a member here of the Conservation Commission, Alesia Maltz. Maybe some of you know her. I just learned a little bit about her before she joined on our call, that she is the mentor to our presenter tonight and holds her in the highest esteem. And we have to send our congratulations to Alesia Maltz, who has just taught her last class at Antioch, New England, in the Environmental Studies PhD program. So congratulations on your retirement, Alesia, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I am absolutely delighted to introduce my friend and colleague and former student, Sasha Adkins. Sasha is a professor at Loyola University in Chicago, where they teach about climate change and environmental health. They are an extraordinary teacher, a teacher's teacher, a person who educates the whole person. Sasha served in AmeriCorps and throughout her life has striven for environmental justice. They've worked as a journalist, bringing environmental health news to people. Their beautiful book, From Disposable Culture to Disposable People, I'm going to hold it up so you can see it, succinctly outlines Sasha's dissertation, which explores the science of plastics as well as the spiritual dilemmas of living in a world infused with plastic. To the core, Sasha practices what they preach and applies what they know. They were inaugural fellows with Green Faith, an interfaith group for religious environmental leadership. Sasha also spent 6 months in an eco-village in Missouri, trying to live entirely without plastic. Failed, I think, from day one, and have been reflecting since on the limits of individual action to reduce plastic. So we'll just be discussing that this evening. It is an absolute pleasure and delight to have you here with us, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Alesia, and it's quite an honor to be introduced by someone that I hold in such high regard and without whom I would not be here. So thank you. Thank you, Dawn, for inviting me. I have some slides that I will go through, and then we will open it to questions and answers, which is actually my favorite part of the conversation. So I'll begin with an acknowledgement that I live in Evanston, Illinois, built on the original homeland of the Council of Three Fires, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa peoples. But I didn't grow up here. I lived on a sailboat for 7 years, from when I was 7 until I was 14. This actual boat, it's called Rainbow Chaser. And we sailed around the Atlantic, and I considered that my backyard. So I remember jumping overboard all the time. My parents tried to get me to watch Jaws, so I'd be a little afraid of the water and stop doing it, but I kept doing it. And so it was really heartbreaking for me as an adult to go back to the sea and see the changes, including the plastic pollution in the ocean, which is what I did my dissertation about. So I'd like to start by going through how we framed this problem. From the beginning, I actually came into this work when very few people were paying attention to it. And now it's a really common dinner table conversation topic. So let's look at how we've moved through it and where we need to go. In the beginning, it was considered an aesthetics problem. It looks bad to have plastic over this pristine beach, which is really about economics, tourism, and public relations. So at that time, the framing led to the solution of burying it under the sand. And so there were workers who were invisible to the tourists, who would get up before they would, dig holes and bury all that before the tide comes back in again. And I don't need to say this is not really an effective solution. And then we started realizing that it's a problem for charismatic megafauna, the poster children of environmentalism. The sea turtle being entangled or having a straw in its nose. The whales found beached with their stomachs full of plastic. And yes, this is horrible and really tragic. But what this led to was, okay, we need to get the plastics controlled, managed properly. And the idea was that if people could just learn not to litter, we could keep going with this disposable culture without the negative impacts. So this young woman helped do a beach cleanup. It looks so much better after, but we have to ask not only what will happen when the tide comes in, but where is all that plastic that she collected going to go? It will go to a landfill or the incinerator. Full disclosure, I just intentionally bought something made out of plastic. It's a litter box for my cats, and it's made of ocean plastic. So it's theoretically recycled from fishing equipment that have been collected from the Pacific. There's only so many things we need that can be made of this. And so the real focus needs to be on upstream. Back in the around 2006, 2007, I think it was, the first study came out showing that it's not just that the whale's stomach is full of plastic, but it's that the whole food web is being contaminated with it. So this was a famous study in Singapore where researchers went to a market and they bought fish that other people were buying and measured the plastics in the fish and realized that most of the plastics in the fish were not coming from the ocean. Most of the plastics in the fish in this display case are settling from the air, because it's not just the ocean that's full of plastic. It's the indoor and outdoor air that we're all breathing all the time. So if you notice how many things in this photograph are made of plastic that might be shedding micro and nanoparticles onto the fish, we see the bucket, we see the fishmonger's shirt, probably not 100% cotton, it's probably a blend of synthetic, and the apron too, the trays that the fish are in, the plastic bags for the customers, the bags and backpacks here, just about everything except maybe the tiles and the top of that scale. And so it's a problem not just of oceans, but of the whole food web. So the air in the pristine mountain range in Europe, the Pyrenees, was measured and found to have microplastics. Rainwater in Colorado, microplastics. And if you can see this blue-purple thread right here, that's from clothing. That's actually one of the biggest sources of plastics in the ocean when we wash our clothing. So there was a silly contest. How long can you go without doing your laundry? How many times can you re-wear the clothing? That's actually not the best approach, I can say, from a public health perspective. The best approach is make your clothing out of natural fibers, cotton, hemp, linen, silk, bamboo. Otherwise, they're ending up in our rain. We're all eating the equivalent of a credit card's worth of plastic a week. And infants who are bottle fed with plastic bottles, remember the alternative is glass, are consuming 2,000 credit cards a week of plastic because the well-meaning parents are sterilizing the bottle. And the more you heat that and the more you use harsh detergents on it, the more it breaks down the plastic and releases it into the formula. Plastic has been found in the human placenta on the baby side. And it's been found in human poop. Not surprising, it's passing through us. And that actually has led to studies of biosolids, which is when wastewater treatment plants de-water human waste and put it into the fields as fertilizer. So this is one of the ways that micro and nanoplastics are being transferred to the soil, where it appears that the chemicals in the plastics are then taken up by the roots of crops. So it is also a public health problem. The response by industry, for the most part, has been greenwashing. So their line that they're going to live and die by is, as long as we manage our waste properly. And what this is saying is we don't have to stop producing it. Let's just focus on the end of life of plastic and everything will be fine. What I'd like to do, though, is focus on the whole cycle of the production, manufacture, distribution, and disposal of plastic, as we'll talk about in a moment. And this is also a way to shift blame to the consumers. So put the spotlight on the consumers while they're sorting or not sorting at their bin. And that takes the spotlight off of them. Famous public service announcement, which was on so many levels problematic. First is that it's called The Crying Indian. He's actually Italian. He's not Indian. And so it's a problem that we have a white person playing a Native American playing, and that the Indian is portrayed in this very stereotypical way, in a canoe, going down the pristine river, representing some time before technology began polluting, right? And he comes to a part of the river where there's more industrialization and pollution in the water. He gets out and lands the canoe and is standing watching the cars go by, and someone throws their litter and hits his feet and splatters his legs, and a single tear is shed. And their tagline is not, hey, don't be disrespectful of Native Americans, or let's not throw our garbage at other people. It's people start pollution, people can stop it. The problem is the consumer. And what is not visible in this ad is that Keep America Beautiful Inc., which sounds like such a lovely name, is an AstroTurf organization. AstroTurf meaning not grassroots. It's a public relations group that was hired by the beverage bottlers in order to reduce resistance to the shift from glass to plastic packaging. They were against the bottle bills that were being proposed at the time. So they wanted to take the heat off of the beverage bottling company and put it onto you. And that's not fair. So we used to have a system where milk was delivered in glass bottles, and you would put out your empties and they would be sterilized and reused. And so there wasn't a problem of what to do with the billions of containers left over. And the bottle bills were actually a way to start acclimating us to a throwaway culture. One of the things that's really interesting here is that it's a way of externalizing the costs when we recycle, because those bottles and packages that are thrown away, the city or the individual household has to pay to have those collected. So it doesn't go on the bottom line of the manufacturers. And if we think about climate change, notice that these trucks tend to get 1 to 3 miles per gallon. So even more effective than not driving to work and riding your bike to work instead would be producing less trash for these trucks to have to go pick up. So this all needs to be part of the conversation. We're subsidizing the plastic industry, both federally with fossil fuel subsidies and also through municipal trash collection and recycling programs. So I'm going to make the controversial claim that recycling actually increases the demand for new plastics because people feel better about their consumption. So for example, this road is made from waste plastics. Hooray, not so fast. When you drive or walk or bike over this road, you're abrading that surface, and tiny microplastics will be released into the air, into the water, and it's not reducing the need in air quotes, for new plastic bottles. People feel better about using those plastic bottles, and they're not demanding change because they believe that it's going to be repurposed into this other existence. So the point of recycling is not to reduce your waste, it's to reduce your guilt so that you keep consuming. These are not recycling codes. These are resin codes. They've been sued over using the recycling symbol in the resin code, but it was an intentional strategy to trick consumers into thinking that if they flip the package over and see the chasing arrows, that it can be recycled. That's not the case. There's only a market for post-consumer 1 and 2, for the most part. Polyethylene terephthalate, which are single-use water bottles, high-density polyethylene, which is like milk jugs. The rest of it, there's really not a demand for it. And right now, with the pandemic, with China no longer accepting our bales of recyclable plastics, most of what goes in your blue bin is probably going to the landfill or the incinerator. And that's a really frustrating thing to hear. But if we get angry enough, we might ask for real change. And we're going to look at what that would be like. Japan claims to recycle 86% of its plastic. However, most of that is what they're calling thermal recycling. They burn it and use the heat or the energy to heat a swimming pool for the town or to heat a particular public building. But again, this is not reducing the demand for new plastic consumption. I would argue that it's not really recycling. And it's easier to pick on thermal recycling than the system we have here, but I would still not call what we're doing at its best recycling. I would call it downcycling. So the frame that I hope we are shifting towards is that it's not only a public health problem, but an environmental justice problem. The workers who handle our trash are still, for the most part, invisible. This is a young woman in Manila in the Philippines who's not going to school, who's surviving on the money that she's earning, collecting and selling these bits of trash. And right now, that market is not very profitable. She and these other children are going to have to work longer days in order to feed themselves. And in the midst of this, the Council on Science and Health, which is a Koch brother funded front group for fossil fuel industries, is saying you are not the problem, Asia is. Sorry, I have a very spoiled cat who wants me to open the cat door. Asia uses these sachets. These are marketed by US companies often, like Procter & Gamble, towards people living with poverty who can't afford a whole bottle of shampoo or soap or other necessities. They can't save up that much money at one time. And so they purchase a single use amount in a sachet that is layered, paper, foil, plastic. And it's true that these sachets cannot be collected and downcycled. They're being littered. They're a solid waste issue. But I would argue that instead of the consumers living with poverty in Asia being the problem, we should point to the companies who are manufacturing these unsustainable pouches. And we should look at the whole picture of why folks are living in poverty in the first place. I call what's happening now toxic colonialism. So colonialism was a situation where wealthy countries would extract resources and people and their labor from the colonies, the colonized countries. What we're doing now is bringing that full circle by sending our waste, particularly toxic waste like plastics, back to those countries for them to deal with. So this is a still from a movie called Plastics China, where the little girl is holding a younger sibling born on a pile of plastic waste. And she plays all day because they can't afford her school fees, looking at US magazines for items that she wants to buy someday when she can afford it. And it's a really heartbreaking look at how the health of this family is devastated by the chemicals in the plastics that someone had meticulously sorted into a blue bin that were put onto container ships to China, and that they're trying to melt down into pellets in case there's a buyer to reuse those pellets. They're picking dead fish from the creek because they're easier to catch, but they were killed by the chemicals in the plastics that are slowly impacting the immune function, reproductive function, and neurological function of all of the people in this household and their community. And the framing that I'm seeing here in the US is again focused on consumers and consumers here. So this article is designed to have people anxious about, is our tofu being contaminated? Oh, I'm sorry, I just noticed there's an issue with the sound. Is my sound coming through, Alesia? Okay, thanks. And so in Indonesia, they're burning our recyclables as fuel to make tofu. And this article isn't asking the question or asking explicitly enough, what's happening to the health of the workers and the people in this community breathing the smoke? I want us to center workers and frontline communities. So does Tati the cat. We have to start with the extraction of fossil fuels in the upper left corner. The worker in the X-ray, do you see the black lines at the tip of the worker's fingertips? That is the bones being resorbed. So in other words, it's the bones being dissolved inside the worker's hands, which he experiences as numbness and tingling like frostbite. And nerve pain, and then the bands will begin to grow as more bone dissolves. This is a condition that is known to occur in workers who have contact with vinyl chloride, which is the building block of number 3 plastic, vinyl. But it's not just the workers, it's the communities at the fence line, which may be called fence line or frontline communities. And in the picture on the right, we see the children playing sports. So they're exercising, they're breathing really hard and breathing in all that smoke from a vinyl chloride factory. So can we go forward to systems like in India, where lunches are delivered in stainless steel tiffins that are then collected, sterilized, and reused? Yes, there are groups that are working on making this possible again in the United States. One of them that we're trying to get in Chicago is called Dispatch Goods. And they will put out bins for the customers to leave their dirties. They'll sterilize them and give them back to the restaurants. If you're interested in this, the Shed Aquarium here in Chicago will be doing a webinar with restaurants later this month. In San Francisco, the Zuni Cafe has already switched all of their takeouts to reusable stainless steel containers. I take my own tiffin when I go to a restaurant, just in case I'm not hungry enough to eat everything on my plate, but it's still illegal here to ask the workers to put it into the container. I have to do it myself so that the workers aren't touching it. So many restaurants misunderstand and they won't serve you something on a for here plate for you to put into your tiffin. So we've got to work with public health departments around the country to make sure that we have robust systems in place to sterilize these containers, to have protocols for the workers, and to educate them on what the policies and the laws actually say, so that more customers can bring their own or more restaurants can switch to offering reusables. But a caveat, eco takeouts, which are polypropylene plastic, I don't think this is the way to go. These containers are designed for you to put hot food in and for them to be washed and reused. Remember what we said about baby bottles. Polypropylene, which has resin code number 5, has a story to it. A researcher in Canada was working on Parkinson's disease, I believe, and he had brain cells, human brain cells, in Petri dishes and was experimenting with them when suddenly all of the brain cells died and he couldn't figure out what had happened and traced it back to additives in the polypropylene plastic that he was using as lab equipment. The oleamides and quats are neurotoxic, meaning they kill brain cells. So when he realized this, his group published an emergency alert in the journal Science, one of the most respected journals, and said, if this is killing brain cells in our lab, maybe we shouldn't be storing food in it. But one thing I'd like to point out is that not only is it still on the market, of course, oleamides are a naturally occurring substance. They're found in the fatty parts of your skin, just like estrogen is a naturally occurring substance. You still wouldn't want synthetic estrogen in your body any more than you'd want synthetic oleamides in your body. Quats are a biocide. They're designed to kill microbes, which are being used quite commonly now in this age of COVID. And they are quite toxic. Safer substitutes include sunlight, for one thing, or thymol, which is an oil derived from thyme, the herb thyme. You can go on the EPA's website and get a list of what has been tested and found to kill COVID and which of those are safe. Here's another idea, the loop system, where your groceries are delivered to you in a reusable tote in reusable sterilizable containers. You empty the bottles, instead of putting them into your blue bin at the curb, you just put them back in your tote. And when your next grocery order is delivered, the worker will pick up the tote of dirties and take them back to be sterilized. So I think this is a great system. I'm not going to be a Debbie Downer on this one. It's just not widely available yet. Consumer demand will help it become more widely available. So a colleague of mine, Beth Terry, wrote a wonderful book called Plastic Free: How I Kicked the Plastic Habit and How You Can Too. And there are hundreds of URLs and descriptions and prices in here of exactly what you can do to find reusable alternatives. I really recommend the book, but I want to shift again from individual actions to collective actions. Most of the plastics that we deal with are invisible to you. I went to Whole Foods one day and wanted to buy some eggplant. I love eggplant. And I saw the worker pulling each eggplant out of a plastic sheath, putting them into a trash can and stacking them neatly in those beautiful displays that they have in the produce section. And I asked him, what is that plastic for? Oh, it keeps it from getting bruised during shipment. Oh, how many of the fruits and vegetables come like that? Oh, most of them do. And then he realized what he was revealing, and he went into the back and I didn't see him again. I tried contacting Whole Foods corporate headquarters and didn't get an answer, but it's not a Whole Foods problem. Right? It's that most of the food that we eat, unless it comes directly from your farmer in a CSA box, where the supply chain is reduced and the distance it has to travel is greatly reduced, or unless you're getting it from Alesia's farm stand, it's probably going to come in plastic that's thrown away maybe before you even see it. So where I teach at Loyola University in Chicago, we have a greenhouse in a green building for the School of Sustainability and a designated cafe. It's the same food in the other cafes. Aramark takes the plastic packages off before they put it on the display shelf, only in the School of Sustainability, so that we go across campus to go there thinking we're reducing our plastic waste, and we're not. It's the same thing when I've seen people at stores filling the bulk bins by opening lots of individual plastic containers. Most of the plastic in our lives is invisible and upstream, so we can't change it individually. We have to work together. And one of the ways we can work together is supporting national legislation, like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which this talk is named for, to remind you to please call your representatives and urge them to support this. It will hold companies accountable for the products they create. This is called extended manufacturer responsibility. So we talked about the way that we're subsidizing plastics production by having towns or residents pay for trash and recycling collection. This is shifting the burden and saying, if you're going to produce things that will become garbage, guess who's going to pay for that? You are. It will come out of your profits, and that will incentivize you to find a different way to package your products. That's just one of many wonderful proposals here. We don't think that it will pass this time. It's the second time, I believe, it's been introduced. But every time we introduce it, it's getting more folks educated on the issue and poised to act, and inspiring them to maybe take some pieces of this to the local and state level, where it's easier to make these changes. One final framing, and then we'll open for questions and comments. I read a wonderful book by Michael Mendes called Climate Change from the Streets. And in it, he's advocating for climate justice, not carbon reductionism. And I really was struck by that phrase, carbon reductionism, and thought about, is what we're doing plastics reductionism? because we don't want to buy into that greenwashing idea that it's a waste management problem or that it's an individual consumer issue. We want to look at disposable culture and environmental justice. Disposable culture is what has led us to believe that we're only valuable if we're useful, if we're producing something or consuming something and adding to the economy. And so people who are not producers or consumers, in this mentality where we treat material things as only instrumentally valuable, we start to treat each other and to think of ourselves in those same terms. And so I would argue that instead of plastics, reductionism, where we try to find some magical biodegradable material that can keep everything else going as is, that we really step back and look at what are we saying when we design things to be thrown away, and when we have a culture that treats relationships as only something to hold on to as long as it's useful to you. I think that all this is connected. And so I invite people to do an audit of the plastics that they can see and think about, what does my waste say about who I am? What am I projecting onto trash that I'm trying to distance myself from by throwing it away? How does this taint my relationships with the people who handle my trash? I'm curious how many of you have met the sanitation workers who pick up your trash and your recycling. How many of you have, Alesia has, how many have had conversations with canners, people who go around cities collecting cans and bottles for deposits? My mom has. Granted, she was a public official, but I remember in the summer she would take a silver tray of homemade cookies and lemonade out when the garbage truck came, and you know they were coming because you could hear them, right? She would come out and offer them refreshments and thank them for doing their work. How are relationships being undermined by disposable culture? I did an exercise with a faith-based group that I taught an environmental justice class with. That was so interesting. I asked everybody to find a piece of litter on the ground outside and pick it up, bring it home, and put it in a special place in the house with candles, make a little altar around it. And when you pray this week, I want you to pray for this item and try to see its beauty and think of all the hands that have touched this item from its production until it came into your home. And I didn't say any more than that about my whole theory of habits of the heart, of how we treat things becoming how we think of ourselves and each other. But the students in my class started sharing that when they were doing this exercise, they had this strange pull to reconnect with people that they'd become estranged from and to not throw those relationships away. And so I think there's something to this, and I invite us to explore it. With that, I'd like to open it to, I don't want to just say questions and answers because many of you have things to teach us as well. So open it to a conversation.
Would you like me to start with the question I received from email ahead of time?
Sure.
Sure. So, in reading it, we've touched on many of those items. So, I would like to know, what is the biggest offender? Who is adding to unwanted plastic in the world?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first part of the question. Then, wherever possible, I decline the packaging of anything I buy, but still my recycling bin is full of shampoo bottles and the like. And I was thinking, we mentioned this before, I've always thought, well, I'm doing my part. My recycle bin is full every week, but that's obviously not where we want to be. I feel like a hostage to the system we have in place. Recycling seems like the latest cover up to placate objections to plastics. What to do?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. First of all, the easy thing is I don't use shampoo. There's lots of great bar shampoos out there that Lush makes them if you can handle the strong fragrances. But many other companies do as well. I just use baking soda and apple cider vinegar as a rinse for my hair, and it works great. I think I use that example. It's a little shocking for some people. I know if you told me as a teenager to wash my hair with baking soda and vinegar, I would have told you that you were crazy. But a lot of our consumerism, which I think is the main culprit here, it's not any person, it's the consumerism, is unnecessary and even harming us. There are so many other toxic chemicals in personal care products that cause cancer and asthma and allergies. We don't need them. So it's not a sacrifice we're making for the planet, it's a win-win. The less we consume, the less we're exposing ourselves to these toxics. But I like what someone I see just put into the chat. Hey, let's have a class action suit against these corporations. Let's focus on the corporations and work with them to have truly sustainable packaging, like Loop, where they're reusable containers that it's not glass like the old milk bottles, it won't break, but that can be picked up, sterilized, and reused. There is a book that I love called Pollution is Colonialism by Max Laboran. And in that book, she quotes a plastics industry official as saying, our future is in the trash can. We need to start producing things that will be thrown away so that the market will never be saturated. That's what we have to go after here.
Here is from Thomas Murtha, who is part of our Norfolk Climate Coalition group. Very informative. What can citizens do to demand corporations stop polluting the world with plastics and clean up the mess they've made? There's a lot of onus put on citizens to fix the problem by reducing plastic waste. And as you point out, the onus be on the corporations that profit from plastics to stop plastic production. Yes, legislation, regulation is needed, but what's the best path forward for citizens to transform our disposable culture into a circular economy?
It's a wonderful question, and I think that is the question that's facing us right now. I know here in Chicago, there's a group called Plant Chicago, and it's a building full of for-profit businesses. And whatever is waste from one is feedstock for another. So one makes kombucha, and the SCOBY, is it? The mother of the kombucha becomes wallets. They make it into textiles in another of the building's occupants' businesses. And so everything in that building is used, there is no waste. And I love that it's a prefigurative politic, right? It's a small example of the society that we could create. And it takes relationships among the businesses in that building to really understand what are the things that you won't need. I wonder how I can use that. Entrepreneurial thinking, startup fees for those businesses. There's customers to support them. There's all kinds of ways that we could be part of that solution. And so I'd like to see the change at all levels, both as an individual, what do I not need to buy? What can I trade or get used that doesn't come in this packaging? And then looking at how I can work with others to maybe have a lending library of tools or a lending library of kitchen gadgets or whatever it is, so that we're not all having to buy new stuff. And then expand that out to businesses in the community, to legislation in the community, then to our state, national, international levels. And I think that there's great ways for people to plug in no matter what their gifts are. There's no one role that is going to solve it all. We need people in all of these roles.
Do you want to speak more to Kelly's question about the class action?
Yeah.
So why can't Norfolk have a class action against these corporations that have passed the cost of plastics disposal onto cities and towns?
Yeah, suggest it. I think corporations have deep pockets, and it may not succeed in the way that we would like, but it may educate and raise awareness about the way that corporations have shifted that spotlight away from them, put it back on them. And I think that humor and playfulness are wonderful ways to get the story out and put that spotlight back on them. In addition to maybe class action lawsuits and policies and legislation, let's have skits and puppets, like bread and puppets, in front of these corporate headquarters of what's going to happen to this plastic bag. This will stick in people's minds more than another article in the paper about something that looks really depressing, right? I feel that humor can get through our psychological numbness and defense mechanisms. So let's get creative in our responses too. I'll just give one example of a really creative project that I heard of.
Sure.
This is actually against sexism, but they took Barbie dolls and Ken dolls, or G.I. Joe dolls, and they were the ones that talk. And they bought a whole bunch of them, and they switched the voice boxes and then returned it to the store for a refund. So on Christmas, the children would unwrap Barbie and she would say, "Dead men tell no tales." And Ken would be saying, "I love to go shopping." And they would start this conversation about gender roles, and people didn't forget that. It was called the Barbie Liberation Front. So let's take this kind of playful energy and see what we can do with plastics. I know there's been an opera in Connecticut written about disposable plastics. I know that there have been lots of enormous floats and puppets and parades. What can we do that will stick with people?
My grandmother would have liked this next question. What do you think about using Corningware with a glass top for leftover food in the fridge? Would this be comparable to using like tiffin that you mentioned?
Sure. And I use Pyrex with bamboo lids and lots of mason jars. Mason jars are indispensable for me. I can freeze things in them, pull them out, stick them in a lunchbox, and they'll thaw in the summer by lunchtime. So yeah, I don't use any plastic packaging here at home.
Yeah. Any suggestions for effective incentives we can put in place for civil society to stop the creation and flow of plastics into the biosphere?
Yeah. Let's stop subsidizing fossil fuels, because plastics are one way that we're doing that. Renewables are getting so much more affordable than continuing to use fossil fuels, particularly if we take into account the externalities, the impacts in the environment. And the fossil fuel companies see this. And so plastics is their hope. They're building new plastics factories, investing billions of dollars in these new ethylene crackers in Appalachia and in Texas and Louisiana. And so we need to stop being taken in by the allure of new jobs, because those jobs are dangerous for the workers. We need to demand jobs that have a living wage and are safe and healthy and sustainable. Don't let plastics be the way that we prop up the fossil fuel industry.
One comment I want to jump to about the previous comment about the Corningware and glass top. I cringed a bit upon seeing your critique of reusable plastic containers, since we have switched to them or are trying to as a better alternative to Ziploc bags. Help. Thanks, Eric.
Unfortunately, Eric, the more you use plastic, the more they will shed micro and nanoplastics into your food. You should not reuse plastics. You shouldn't use plastics for food and beverages in the first place, but definitely don't reuse anything for them. And never put hot food or food with an extreme pH, like tomatoes, very acidic, or very fatty foods into plastic containers. So I would definitely go with glass. You're looking for, instead of a Ziploc, there's the beeswax that you can actually make. My colleague made some canvas coated with beeswax that you can put your food in and fold it up and it will keep it airtight. But, you know, we didn't have these plastic options before World War II. So let's look and see what people were doing to keep food safe and healthy then. And often it's going to save you money too. You've got some of those beeswax products as well. Good. And you know, like Clean Canteen makes little containers, little tip-ins that seal airtight. I put all my produce in the fridge when I get it out of its plastic wrappers. If I have to get something from the store, into a stainless steel tip-in with the seal, and it lasts so much longer. So I find that it helps me not waste food too. But Beth Terry's book will have some more ideas for you as well. Saving empty jars, great. Just remember not to fill it all the way up because the underside of the lid could have BPA. There's a plastic epoxy there. When you have a screw-on lid for a jar, you don't want it to touch the underside of that lid.
So of the plastics we have now, how do we dispose of them?
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm focusing on, let's try not to make new ones because we don't have a good way to dispose of them right now. Maybe, you know, someday in the future, those microbes that eat plastic will scale up, but there's so many problems with that because if we have an ecosystem where they have expanded to fill a niche, who are they out competing? So we just don't have a good way to get rid of plastic. It's sort of like nuclear waste. We keep making something we're not sure what we're going to do with, and we're leaving it for future generations to solve that. I did see someone say, what do we do with the synthetic clothing we have? I don't think throwing things away is the way to go. Obviously, keep using things until they're no longer serviceable, and then maybe make a quilt out of them or use them as insulation somewhere, but try not to buy new ones. And if we can shift the demand, the market may respond to that.
So there's another question from Tom for an action item for after. Can you provide an annotated bibliography on plastic issues and action that Dawn can share with participants in this webinar?
There are several of those. I will collect some links. I really recommend Plastic Pollution Coalition as one resource to go to. They do a lot of education on the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act and on plastics in general. But I will collect some links so people can get those resources. Also at the end again of Beth Terry's book, there's a great resource section.
Any other questions, anything, any comments, anything you'd like to share? Yes, Alesia. Oh, you have to unmute.
At the church, we're going to be having plastics, sort of plastics reduction, or how not to use plastics for a day or a week or a month, and we'll have a little group to support that, and we'll do this in July. So stay tuned and we can give you information on that.
I can definitely help you get that information out too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Dawn, I was just curious if people could put into the chat, what is the one thing that they're having the hardest time finding a plastic-free substitute for so far?
Good question.
And while people type that, I see the silicone. Yeah, silicone is a synthetic polymer. Some of it has D5, which is a known hormone disruptor. So I don't think that silicone is a substitute for plastic. That makes it harder. I know. Thank you, Eric. I don't see folks in the chat giving stumpers. I thought you could stump me on my way out. What's the one thing that's really hard to find a substitute for? So there's bamboo toothbrushes with plant-based bristles, and Bite is one of the tooth pellets that you can get. It comes in a little glass mason jar. They just send you a real wax paper refill when you're ready for it. You bite the tablet and it foams in your mouth instead of toothpaste. Works great. Big items like cars, computers are the ultimate challenge, indeed. That's what got me in my eco-village. It's like, I've got to stay connected. And I need a phone and I need internet, which means electricity, which means this whole plastic infrastructure. So let's focus on stopping the production and use of single-use plastic. And when we've done that, we can talk about durable plastics and medical devices. If you have food you want to freeze, yeah, I've got tons of mason jars in my freezer, but maybe you need to freeze in plastic. That's actually, from a public health perspective, the molecules slow down when you freeze them. It's not going to leach as much as long as it's not hot when you put them in there. So maybe that's not where your focus needs to be. You can focus on other things. A key struggle is food shopping, keeping leftovers. Yeah. Frozen vegetables and fruits. And those paper packages are probably not paper. They tend to be lined with polyethylene plastic or with a PFAS chemical, the forever chemicals, to make it waterproof, stain-proof, grease-proof. And we found that those are one of the biggest public health issues in terms of toxics right now. People are getting compostable containers that they think are compostable. They're lined with this PFAS. It goes in the compost, it's picked up by the food. One of my students was studying kale, and kale grown in soil that was amended with our own Sustainable Cafe's paper to-go container. It's got PFAS and the kale takes it up.
I know that wasn't going to sit well with you, Kelly. When you think you're doing something good, right?
But that's the greenwashing. It's not your fault, right?
Right.
First, we need to demand transparency and accountability and information sharing symmetrically. Stop with all of these. I can't tell you what's in this food you're buying. It's a trade secret. If you want to put it in my body, you have to tell me what it is, right? The banana stickers. Yeah.
There was another comment about it'd be nice if we can make yogurt rather than buying plastic containers of it.
You can. There are settings on a slow cooker where you can get the temperature and the timing right for making yogurt and kefir. And your own glass bottles at home.
Discovered only recently that the individual banana stickers are plastic and not paper.
And actually, the FDA has approved some plastics as direct coatings of fruits and vegetables to make them look pretty longer, extend the shelf life. And you think they're wax, but it's not wax, it's plastic, and you can't wash it off. Some baked goods have plastic in them to make the texture better. Yeah, lots of hidden plastics. And I've learned the goal isn't to be perfect, it's for me to raise my awareness. Where is that line where I can't do anymore as an individual and we have to do this together?
It's so true. Oh.
Thank you.
I just have to end with a sigh. I mean, it was so informative, Sasha. I mean, you know, we all think we're doing our little parts to be better, but it really is going up a few levels to really make an impact, to change the way things are made and packaged and available so easily. That we just want everything so easy, right? Well, we have come to the top of the hour. Is there any last comments or questions for Sasha? I want to thank you so much. It looks a little brighter in the window behind you. It got dark there
Yes.
for a little bit. I was getting worried.
I'm grateful. I hope we get a reprieve. Too many storms.
Too many storms.
But I really feel for the folks in the drought and the heat wave out in the West.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Dawn and Alesia have my email, and any questions, please feel free to send them over anytime. I always love to talk about plastics.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Alesia, thank you for bringing this topic to us and bringing Sasha to the conversation here in Norfolk. So thank you both, and everyone out there, have a good evening. Stay cool, be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.